Does God embrace you after death? Deleuze reveals the truth. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed with that particular frequency that seemed to burrow into Marcus Chen's skull as he sat beside his father's bed. Outside, Seattle's December rain painted diagonal streaks across the windows, and the Space Needle stood like a steel prayer against the grey sky. His father's breathing was shallow, mechanical, each rise and fall of his chest a testament to the machines that now sustained what remained of his life. "You know what I keep thinking about," his father wheezed, eyes still closed. "That time you asked me if God was real, you were 7, maybe 8. Remember what I told you?" Marcus remembered. His father had been grilling burgers in their Bellevue backyard, the suburban sprawl of strip malls and coffee shops stretching beyond their fence. "You said God was like the roots of trees, invisible but holding everything together." "Bullshit answer," his father said, opening his eyes. They were clearer now than they'd been in weeks. "I was scared you'd stop believing in something bigger than yourself." The heart monitor's steady beep filled the silence. Marcus watched the numbers on the screen. Blood pressure, oxygen saturation, heart rate, all reducing his father to data points. He thought about the man who had taught him to drive stick shift in empty parking lots, who had worked 60-hour weeks at Boeing to pay for Marcus's philosophy degree, who now lay connected to a network of tubes and wires like some kind of organic machine. "Dad, you don't have to—" "No, listen." His father's grip tightened around Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "I'm dying and I need to know. All those years in church, all those prayers, all that faith, was it real? Is there really something waiting for me?" Marcus felt the familiar weight settling in his chest, the same feeling he'd carried since graduate school when he'd first encountered Deleuze's work. How do you tell a dying man that maybe the question itself is wrong? That perhaps God and death and meaning don't exist as fixed points waiting to be discovered, but as networks of connection and transformation that we're always already part of? The door opened, and Dr. Sarah Kim entered with her usual efficient grace. She'd grown up in Koreatown in Los Angeles before medical school, and her presence always seemed to fill spaces with a kind of grounded competence. She checked the monitors, made notes on her tablet, and caught Marcus's eye. "How's he doing?" Marcus asked. "Comfortable. The morphine is managing his pain well." She paused, studying his father's face. "Has he been talking about existential things?" "It's common at this stage. Patients often need to process big questions." Marcus's father opened his eyes again. "Doctor, you see people die every day. Do you think there's something after?" Dr. Kim set down her tablet. Marcus recognized the look, the same expression his philosophy professors wore when students asked if Nietzsche really meant God was dead, or if Deleuze's rhizome was just academic nonsense. It was the look of someone navigating between honesty and hope. "I see people transform," she said carefully. "I see families change, grief create new connections, love persist in ways we don't expect. I see death as part of something larger, but not necessarily separate from life." His father frowned. "That sounds like philosophy, not medicine." "Maybe they're not so different," Marcus found himself saying. Both women looked at him. "I mean, maybe the question isn't whether God welcomes us after death. Maybe it's about how we're already connected to something bigger while we're alive." Through the window, he could see the Pike Place market in the distance, that maze of vendors and tourists and locals, all moving through networks of exchange and desire. Fish flying through the air, coffee brewing, conversations in a dozen languages, creating temporary territories of meaning before dissolving and reforming. It was, he realized, exactly what Deleuze meant by multiplicity, not chaos, but productive difference, connections forming and breaking and forming again. His father closed his eyes. "I'm too tired for riddles, son." But Marcus wasn't speaking in riddles anymore. For the first time, sitting in that sterile room with its American efficiency and technological precision, he understood what Deleuze had been trying to say. The question of God and death wasn't about finding the right answer. It was about recognizing that we're always already part of the question itself. The Starbucks on Capitol Hill buzzed with the particular energy of Seattle's creative class, laptops open, conversations blending together, the espresso machine hissing like some kind of urban percussion. Maya Rodriguez sat across from Marcus, her dark eyes intense over her cortado. She'd driven up from Portland specifically to see him, leaving her gallery prep work and the grey Oregon afternoon behind. "You look like hell," she said, not unkindly. Marcus managed a weak smile. "Haven't been sleeping. Dad's getting worse." Maya had known his father since their undergraduate days at University of Washington. She'd been there for the summer barbecues, the awkward holiday dinners where his father tried to understand why Marcus wanted to study philosophy instead of engineering. She'd watched the man grapple with his son's intellectual trajectory, proud but bewildered. "Remember when he asked me what postmodern art was supposed to mean?" Maya said. "At my first show. And you told him it wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was supposed to do something." He looked at me like I'd spoken Martian. She stirred her coffee slowly. "But then he spent an hour staring at that piece about urban displacement. Really looking, you know? Not trying to decode it, just experiencing it." Marcus thought about his father's hands, calloused from decades of assembly work, touching the edges of Maya's installation. Metal and wire, and found objects arranged to suggest the breakdown and reformation of neighborhood boundaries. Deleuze would have called it a desiring machine, not a thing that produces objects, but a process that produces connections, affects new possibilities for experience. "He's asking about God," Marcus said suddenly. "About what happens after." Maya nodded. "Makes sense, but which God? The one from church or the one he actually lived?" It was a good question. Marcus's father had attended services religiously, but his real devotion had been to different rituals: Saturday mornings at the farmer's market in Fremont, the careful maintenance of his tools, the way he'd taught Marcus to read the city's patterns of growth and change. His theology had been practical, embodied, rooted in the specific textures of Pacific Northwest life. "I keep thinking about territorialization," Marcus said. "Deleuze's idea that we create temporary territories of meaning, then abandon them for new ones. Dad's whole life has been about creating territories: family, work, faith, and now he's facing their dissolution." Maya leaned forward. "But deterritorialization isn't just loss, right? It's also possibility. It's what allows new territories to form." Outside, Seattle's urban landscape stretched in all directions. Amazon's glass towers transforming South Lake Union, the old neighborhoods of Capitol Hill gentrifying and resisting in equal measure, homeless camps creating temporary communities under freeway overpasses. The city was always becoming something else, always deterritorializing and re-territorializing simultaneously. "There's something else," Marcus said. "The doctor yesterday, Dr. Kim, she said something that stuck with me. About seeing people transform rather than just die. Like death wasn't an ending, but a different kind of connection." Maya's eyes lit up. "That's very Deleuzian. The body without organs, not absence of structure, but a field of potential where new structures can emerge." They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ambient noise of urban life. A street musician outside played guitar, his melody weaving through the conversations and traffic sounds. 2 tables over, a woman was explaining blockchain technology to her elderly mother, trying to bridge generational gaps in understanding. Near the window, a couple was breaking up, their quiet voices carrying the weight of 3 years together, dissolving into new arrangements of solitude and possibility. "I want to show you something," Maya said, pulling out her phone. She scrolled through photos until she found what she was looking for, a series of images from her current installation. "It's called Lines of Flight. I've been working on it since my mom died last year." The photos showed a complex arrangement of threads and mirrors, creating patterns that seemed to shift depending on the angle of view. Some threads were broken, others newly connected, all of them part of a larger network that was impossible to see in its entirety. Each thread represents a relationship, a memory, a connection that shaped her life, Maya explained. "When she died, I thought those connections were lost, but working on this piece, I realized they were just reconfiguring, moving into new patterns, new territories." Marcus stared at the images. "It's beautiful And terrifying. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Maya put her phone away. Deleuze was right. We're not separate individuals bumping into each other. We're nodes in networks, assemblages of connection and desire and becoming. Death is just one kind of transformation among others. The barista called out drink orders, names echoing through the space. Marcus thought about his father's name being called, about the moment when it would no longer correspond to a living response. But maybe that wasn't the end of the story. Maybe his father's name would continue to circulate, continue to produce effects, continue to be part of the network that connected past and future, the living and the dead. The oncology ward at 3 a.m. had a different quality than during the day. The harsh efficiency softened into something more contemplative, punctuated only by the soft footsteps of night shift nurses and the occasional beep of monitors. Marcus had been sitting with his father for 6 hours, watching him drift in and out of consciousness, their conversations becoming increasingly fragmented and strange. "There's a garden," his father murmured, eyes closed, "behind the house where I grew up in Tacoma. My mother planted vegetables there, tomatoes, carrots, green beans, but also flowers, marigolds to keep the pests away." Marcus had heard stories about this garden before, but tonight they felt different, more urgent. His father's childhood home had been demolished decades ago, replaced by a strip mall that housed a dry cleaner, a tax preparation service, and a bubble tea shop. But in his father's mind, the garden persisted, continuing to bloom and produce in defiance of urban development. "Tell me about the marigolds," Marcus said softly. "Orange and yellow, bright as little suns. Mom said they were companion plants. They helped the other plants grow by keeping harmful insects away. But they were beautiful in their own right, too." His father's breathing was labored, but his voice carried a clarity that had been absent for days. "I've been thinking about that, about how things can be useful and beautiful at the same time. Doctor." Kim appeared in the doorway, making her rounds. Marcus had learned to read her expressions over the past weeks. This one suggested they were entering the final phase. She checked the monitors, adjusted the morphine drip slightly, and sat down in the chair beside Marcus. "How's he doing?" she asked quietly. "He's been talking about his childhood, about plants and gardens. It's like he's traveling back through different versions of himself." Dr. Kim nodded. "It's common. The boundaries between past and present often become more fluid as people approach death. Some families find it disturbing, but I think it's remarkable. Like consciousness is expanding rather than contracting." Marcus thought about Deleuze's concept of becoming, not a movement toward a fixed goal, but a process of continuous transformation. His father wasn't just remembering his childhood, he was becoming child again, accessing modes of experience that had been layered over by decades of adult responsibility. At the same time, he was becoming something else entirely, something that didn't fit the usual categories of identity. "Doctor," his father said suddenly, eyes opening, "what does it feel like to die?" Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. "I don't know. I've only seen it from the outside. But from what I observe, it seems like a kind of opening. Like the boundaries that usually contain us become more permeable." "That's what I was afraid of," his father said. "Losing myself, becoming nothing." "But what if becoming nothing isn't the same as being nothing?" Marcus found himself saying. "What if it's more like becoming everything? Like the boundaries between you and not you start to dissolve, and you become part of something larger?" His father turned his head to look at him. "You sound like your philosophy books again." "Maybe. But maybe the philosophy books were trying to describe something real, something about how identity works, how consciousness works. Deleuze said we're not fixed selves, we're processes, flows, networks of connection and desire." Dr. Kim was listening intently. "That's interesting. In medical terms, we know that consciousness is distributed across multiple brain networks. It's not located in any single place. When someone is dying, those networks are reorganizing, connecting in new ways." Through the window, Marcus could see the first hints of dawn touching the Seattle skyline. The city was beginning its daily process of awakening. Coffee shops opening, commuters beginning their journeys, the complex machinery of urban life starting to turn. But from this height, It looked more like a vast organism than a collection of separate parts. Lights flickering on in apartment windows, traffic flowing along arterial roads like blood through vessels, information networks pulsing with data and desire. "The garden is still there," his father said suddenly. "Not the physical garden, that's gone, but the relationships. The way the marigolds connected to the tomatoes, the way my mother's hands connected to the soil, the way the whole system produced food and beauty and meaning. That's still happening, just in different places, different ways." Marcus felt something shift inside him. His father wasn't just approaching death, he was approaching a different understanding of what life had been all along. Not a separate self struggling against the world, but a node in a network, a temporarily stable pattern in a larger flow of becoming. "The marigolds deterritorialize," Marcus said quietly. "They leave the specific garden, but their function continues. They become part of other assemblages, other networks of care and growth." His father smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen in weeks. "Now you're talking my language, son, the language of gardens and connection and things that grow." Dr. Kim stood to continue her rounds, but paused at the door. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about becoming everything versus becoming nothing. In physics, energy is never destroyed, it just transforms into new configurations. Maybe consciousness works the same way." After she left, Marcus and his father sat in comfortable silence, watching Seattle wake up beyond the window. The city sprawled in all directions, a vast rhizome of human connection and desire, constantly deterritorializing and reterritorializing, constantly becoming something new while remaining fundamentally itself. The memorial service was held at the community center in Fremont, not far from the farmers' market, where Marcus's father had shopped every Saturday for 30 years. The space was filled with an assemblage of people that surprised Marcus in its diversity: colleagues from Boeing, neighbors from the old Bellevue house, members of St. Matthew's Lutheran, vendors from the market who remembered his father's weekly conversations about tomatoes and weather patterns. Maya had driven up from Portland again, and Dr. Kim had stopped by after her shift. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at faces that represented different territories of his father's life. In Deleuzian terms, each person embodied a different line of connection, a different aspect of the network that had sustained and been sustained by his father's existence. The question that had haunted his father's final weeks, whether God would welcome him after death, suddenly seemed less important than this evidence of how thoroughly he had been welcomed into the world while living. "My father asked me recently whether I believed in God," Marcus began. "It's not an easy question for a philosophy student who spent years reading about the death of God, the end of grand narratives, the fragmentation of meaning in modern life. But sitting with him these past weeks, I realized I'd been thinking about the question wrong." He paused, looking at Maya, who nodded encouragingly. "The question isn't whether there's a God waiting to welcome us after we die. The question is how we're already being welcomed every day into networks of connection and care and love that exceed our individual boundaries." Mrs. Patterson from the house next door wiped her eyes. She was 83, had known his father for 2 decades, had shared countless conversations over their back fence about lawn care and local politics and the changing character of the neighborhood. Her grief was part of a larger assemblage of grief that extended beyond the room, beyond Seattle, into networks of connection that his father had helped create and maintain. "Gilles Deleuze wrote about something called rhizomes," Marcus continued. "Unlike trees which have central trunks and hierarchical branches, rhizomes spread underground in multiple directions. Creating networks without center or origin, they can be broken at any point, but they continue to grow, to connect, to produce new shoots and flowers." He thought about his father's hands in the garden of his childhood, about the marigolds that had long since returned to soil, about the companion planting that continued in different gardens, taught by people who had never met his father, but who were nevertheless connected to him through chains of knowledge and care. "My father was a rhizome," Marcus said, his voice steadier now. "Every conversation he had, every person he helped, every Saturday morning at the farmers' market, these weren't separate events in a linear story. They were connections in a network that continues to grow even now, even here, even in his absence. He looked out at the assembled faces, Dr. Kim, Maya, neighbors, colleagues, market vendors. So when my father asked if God would welcome him, I think now I understand what he was really asking. Not whether some distant authority would judge him worthy, but whether the connections he'd made would continue, whether the love he'd given would persist in new forms. Marcus abandoned his notes entirely. And the answer is yes. Not because of faith in an afterlife, but because of the evidence in this room. The marigolds he remembered from his childhood garden are blooming here now, in every act of companion care, in every relationship that helps another grow. Outside afterward, Marcus walked with Maya toward her car, past the Fremont Troll and coffee shops, through all the dense urban networks that made Seattle what it was. "Your dad would have understood it," Maya said, in his own language. Marcus smiled. "The language of gardens and hands and Saturday mornings. Deleuze just gave me words for what my father lived." After she drove away, Marcus walked back toward Capitol Hill. The rain began to fall, soft and persistent. He thought about his father's question, "Is there really something waiting for me?" and realized the answer had been there all along, not in some distant afterlife, but in the network of concern and care that made the question matter. His father hadn't gone anywhere. He had simply become, otherwise, deterritorialized into the countless connections he'd made and maintained, the relationships that would continue to grow and transform long after the machines in that hospital room had fallen silent. The rain connected him to the sky, to the soil, to the vast network that sustained the city's gardens and streets and lives. He thought about marigolds blooming in his father's childhood memory, about companion plants helping each other grow, about how nothing ever really ends. It just transforms into new assemblages, new territories, new lines of flight. And somewhere in that network his father was still becoming, still connecting, still blooming bright as little suns.